Call to order of a special meeting of the Goodyear City Council, 18 September 2006. I'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance and invocation by Vice Mayor Cavalier.
If you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If you wish, please join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, assist us today in making the best decisions we can to benefit the citizens of our fair city. Look over our staff and protect our security, our fire and police as they do their daily duties. And please, Lord, bring our boys and girls, men and women who are overseas and protecting our soil, bring them home safely. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. We have 5 of the 7 council members in attendance today. 2 are out of state, and we could not even arrange teleconference. Since the nameplates are facing a different direction and there are new people in our meeting, I'd like to introduce the council that is here. Council Member Fred Scott, Vice Mayor Frank Cavalier, Council Member Dick Souza, and Council Member Rob Antonia. Are there any minutes to approve today? D, I don't see any. D? Minutes? None. Okay, no minutes, no expenditures. Are there any communications from city manager or council or public? Okay.
No, sir.
Okay, opportunity now for anyone from the public to present to the council any item, any subject which is not on this evening's agenda. Not on this evening's agenda. Would anyone like to speak to an on-agenda item?
This morning's agenda.
What did I say?
This evening.
This evening.
Creatures of
Okay,
habit.
this morning.
8 hours ago.
So that they really went like that.
All right, we have the consent agenda, and it's nothing on the consent agenda today. We just have one item, and that's the spring training facility, and we'll receive an update on the facility, and we'll hopefully come to a conclusion and direct staff as to how we wish them to proceed. And I believe Randolph, you'll start. And Brian, will you be introducing Eric and John?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. First and foremost, thank you for your availability this morning as we talk about next steps for where we're going with spring training. And I do want to talk a little bit about where we're at and then also where we plan on going. The recommendations that we're going to be asking council today have to do with spring training, and it's the first item, or the first consideration is to direct staff to continue pursuing a spring training facility to include finalizing related memorandums of understanding, funding, and reimbursements. The second alternative that we're asking for City Council is to direct staff to cease pursuing the spring training facility at this time. Today, it's the culmination of a lot of work, I think, that's brought us here. And I wanted to take just a minute, Mr. Mayor, if I may, and members of the council, talk about what brought us to this point. And the first thing is that if we go back a little bit into history, the city has had a long-standing interest in pursuing spring training. And in fact, in September 2004, the citizens of Goodyear passed by 2-1, virtually a 2-1 vote in favor of a $10 million general obligation bond that would help to fund a spring training facility. And that we took as a very strong support for the city to go forward. And as a result, City Council made this a very high priority. High priority in that we committed staff resources. The city manager certainly provided the resources necessary to pursue the project. And what we did is we looked at where we might put spring training. So we went through a request for information process, and as part of that, we did select Rose Properties and the Wood Family's properties to actually locate the spring training facility. From that, we then went out to baseball. We went out to baseball and we sent a packet of information that was our proposal to 13 different teams to try and solicit interest for locating their facilities in Goodyear. And it's been a very long, arduous process. And those folks who were most active with this, I want to bring mention to. The mayor's leadership certainly was a big part of this in talking with the teams and talking to the STA, and a lot of behind-the-scenes work. Also like to recognize Economic Development Corey Spiegel, who's been working very closely on this project along the way. And Kelly Dalton, even though she's gone now, she worked real hard on this project as well. But I also like to recognize those outsiders, what I call outsiders, or those external to the city that really played a key role into where we are today. And that is the Wood family for really not losing sight of the fact that this is a facility that can work, and to offer up their land to be considered. And Rose Properties, John Ruggieri specifically, but working with Jack Rose in always trying to determine how best we can keep going forward and how best to work in partnership with the city. And I would also like to recognize Eric Judson with JMI Sports. John Moore's San Diego Padres is the owner, but Eric has been vital in this effort because of his connections in baseball. And quite frankly, we wouldn't be here today without his support. Scott Ruby, our bond counsel, has worked with the STA before and has been our counsel throughout this process. So been a lot of efforts over the last several months. So where we're at is we have had an opportunity to go back and look at what our financials are. Look at what we first brought to council and where we're at different from then till today. And also wanted to take the opportunity today to have Eric talk about where we're at with the baseball teams themselves. And he will be sitting up here in a few minutes to talk about that. But I'd first like to cover the financials. And the financials, you have an updated spreadsheet, and thank you to Council Member Scott, who asked a question of me this weekend, where we're at, what is different from where we were before. And the spreadsheet that you have, it has some colored numbers on there. It has, the top of the page says City of Goodyear funding strategy for sports and recreation campus. And when we first asked council for direction, we were always looking at a two-team complex. Two-team complex is the numbers where you're going to see the difference. And one team, I'll talk about that in a few minutes as far as where that's at and how we might be able to consider a one team if that's the direction of council. But the costs initially, and if you look at the two-team where I have the April estimate, that's what council last saw. And that's an estimate that had $60 million in for a spring training facility. And you'll notice that the cost now, and this is based on estimates that JMI Sports has received from that they've been able to update those costs, and we now see that it's about $77,500,000 for a stadium. Difference is $17,500 that you'll see in the red there.
$17,500,000.
For a two-team.
For a two-team. And I'm going to focus on two-team stadium at this point, and then we will talk about one team and why we're looking at that. If you go down through really the estimates on a two-team, you'll see that the biggest differences is cost of construction. Costs have gone up. We've seen that with some of our capital improvement plan projects, and we've seen where that affects us today, and we're looking at about $17.5 million more dollars. So, how do we fund that? If you go to the bottom table where it says funding sources, you'll see exactly how we're proposing to to fund the differences. We know that the STA is committed to, and this is going to be a little confusing, and I'll bring it right back into point, but the STA has committed, suggested that they have $48 million in funding available. But keep in mind that they would not be paying the cost of that off until about 2017, 2018. So we have about a 10-year window there where the city would be required to fund the interest portion of that. If you look at what that means in real dollars, we're looking at a net present value of the $60 million. $48 million today, $60 million when we actually, because they would allow a net present value to increase over time at about 4.5% interest per year. So the $60 million that you'll see on the two-team cost is consistent with what we've heard from the STA. The next item where it says city facility improvements, that has to, you'll see in red there, $3.5 million. That is an additional amount that was not before council previously as far as what it would take for additional dollars from the city to actually fund a two-team facility. The next line item talks about the developer land facility contribution. I want to be very careful when I say that. That's a contribution of land. It's also, it may not be a direct contribution in terms of cash, but what it does is it is a contribution of resources or facilities or land that will help us to make this project successful. And I'd like to reiterate the incredible support that we've had from, again, the Wood family and Rose Properties to make this happen. When we got these figures about a week ago, we looked at this and it was a price tag that we didn't feel like we could go forward as a city. So we met with Rose Properties and working with their team, they put on the table an additional $6 million. It's going to help make this project work. And John Ruggieri, Mr. Ruggieri can talk to that in a little more detail if there are questions. But essentially what that is, it reduces the $77.5 million price tag, and it now has them putting in about $31 million in land, facilities, and fees that will help us to make this project work. All the other figures are relatively the same, but you look at the team contribution, and we have $3 million for team contribution for a two-team. That may or may not be cash. That may be a reduction in the scope of the project. So in other words, if we were to say $77.5 million, it's now $74.5 million. That's all that we're going to fund this project for. So with that, we are either looking at reducing the scope or we're looking at cash contributions on an annual amount that would help us to be able to absorb this additional $3 million. So primarily, that's where we have made up the difference. The city has made up a difference of an estimated $3.5 million. We have an increase in about $11 million from the land facility contribution from the developer, and then the team contribution. So that's how we've been able to make up that difference. Took a lot of work to get us there, but we did get there, and we feel like that meets the intent of the STA. I want to talk a little bit about the STA, and Mr. Ruby can certainly add to it as he's worked with them more closely over the years. But the STA has all along recommended that they are interested in a two-team stadium only, and they have asked us if we end up making application that there are 3 criteria that must be met. And that's two-team complex, that's making sure that we have land, and also well actually it's 4 items. The financing, and then the last item is to have 2 teams that have signed letters of intent. So that's been their marching orders to staff to date. With that, as we worked through the process, and again, we contacted 13 teams and we have worked very diligently in trying to secure those teams. we started looking at a one-team opportunity because we felt stronger that we had one team that could commit to this project. And with the one team, again, this does not necessarily reflect the support of the STA, but what it does do is it shows the City Council of the costs that would be associated with the one-team facility. And the things that I want, only a couple of items that I'll point out here. If you look at the funding sources for one team, you'll see that we're estimating $37 million and change from the STA to reimburse. Well, this is about a $27 million if factoring in the net present value. We feel like that's getting us close. They may end up funding 24 million or 50%. We're not sure, but what we're putting on the table is that they would actually be funding about $27 million. Again, factoring net present value, we have 37 million. So we feel like that's a reasonable request to the STA. But the next item in red is what you see on a city facility improvements. This is the amount that the city would be required to put toward this project. And to put towards this project, that would be an additional $11 million for the city to go forward. Now, if you think about a one-team facility, what does that get us? Well, what it gets us is a spring training complex. It gets us a one-team training facility. It gets us 6.5 practice fields, of which the city would have use of 4 of those during the non-spring training time. So we have 4 fields that could be used by the public for different events, different venues, including perhaps Little League Baseball. But it would be park facilities that the city would own and operate. So there is a cost, more of a cost to the city on a one team, and the biggest reason is the STA is looking for a 2 team, and they are looking for reimbursing less for a one team facility. So that's why the price tag goes up for a one team. So what does this mean to the city in terms of costs on an annual basis? Because it's very important for us to consider as we're growing as a community. We have a lot of capital projects. We met with the finance director who is conservative, and in fact, council is going to be hearing from him next Monday on ensuring financial success and stability of the community. But finance director, one of the things that he will say is, yes, we can afford this, but it does come down to decisions as far as where we go from here. And he'll be talking to council in more depth on that again next Monday. But if you look at what we've estimated previously, on the next spreadsheet where it says City of Goodyear annual costs, and on a 2-team facility, you quickly look at the first 2 line items under annual debt service. You'll see that there's $2.7 million, and that's the debt service that the city would have in what we call gap interest, or the interest until such time as the STA would start the reimbursements of the principal. The next item is that gap that I talked about that the city would be responsible for an estimated $3.5 million. And that comes at a cost of about $157,000 a year. Those first 2 items are for interest only. They do not retire the principal. So what that means is that the STA, when they start reimbursing, they will be reimbursing for that $60 million. For that $3.5 million, the city would actually be, at that time out in the future, be retiring that debt at the same time as the STA starts their reimbursements. Because we go out for one bond that would actually be able to allow us to get to that point where interest only until such time as we pay the principal in about 10 years. Everything else has stayed the same on the next 2 line items. We look at the Public Improvement Corporation, that's for the offsites. The city would own land. The city would be required to put in streets and water lines and sewer lines and sidewalks and right-of-way landscaping. So we all along knew that we were going to have about that we were going to put $10 million on the table for the offsites for our property. The other item is the $10 million general obligation bond that the public authorized us to go after, and that would be used primarily for acquisition of portions of the property for this complex. So if you look at the bottom line annual debt service, that's about $4.7 million per year. In previous estimates, I believe when we talked to council, there's been about a $3 million estimate or price tag on an annual basis. So this does increase us about $1.7 million a year. For the annual O&M and capital replacement costs, this hasn't really changed. So if you add the two numbers together, we're looking at $6.9, almost $7 million in annual cost to the city for this project for a two-team. Jumping over to the one team, we look at the annual debt service for that, and again, the $37.3 million, that is interest only until such time as the STA, if in fact they support the project, would begin, we would pay the interest up to the point of them reimbursing that amount. The $11 million is a net interest carry cost of $500,000 per year. But again, about 10 years from now, that would be a debt that the city would be acquiring and be responsible for paying down the principal at that point that the STA starts their portion of the reimbursement. Everything else pretty much stays the same, so that the annual debt service for a one-team complex is about $3.7 million. All along, we've been pushing for a two-team, and you'll hear where we're at right now. So this is the first that council has seen for a one-team cost estimate. And you'll notice on the O&M costs, that's factored in there as well. That is a reduced cost because it's one less training facility as part of this. So the annual cost for that's about $5.6 million, combined O&M, interest carry, and principal retirement. So I wanted to step us through where we're at in the costs. We feel confident that these costs are the best estimates that we have to date. We worked hard, and special thanks to JMI Sports for really trying to hone in on what costs are today. So we feel confident that these estimates are very, very close. Short of actually having design of the project and having bids for the project, we feel like this is something that we could be fairly confident in. So what that does is it gives council, and I'd ask for any questions before I ask Eric Judson to come up here to talk about the state of the recruitment process for baseball, and ask if there are any questions on the financials first.
Councilmember Scott?
First of all, thank you for the presentation here. This makes it a lot easier to follow. But after having said that, I think what we need to know is, you said somewhere down the line, Larry is going to prioritize our wish list as far as capital improvement money is concerned. And then we will know where this may fall into our list of prioritized expenses. I think we have to know that up front now. We have to be able to prioritize and say that if we're going to move ahead with this stadium, which is a tremendous idea, what is it going to cost us with regard to other projects that we're going to have to put on the back burner? And that's the kind of information we need in order to make a decision here, I think.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Scott, it's a good point, and one of the things, I'm going to say a couple of things. One is the timing of where we're at with baseball and looking for some consideration at council to keep going forward at this point, and the time, why that is a critical in terms of time right now. The other is on the financials. I would ask, I'm going to put Larry Lang, our finance director, on the spot for a second. understanding it as a draft presentation that's not ready for presentation to council, but I think that he can best address some of your concerns. So if I can invite Mr. Lang up here.
Thank you and good morning. Since I wasn't really prepared to address this issue this morning, I will be brief on it. The presentation that I will be doing next week before you is to look at a number of tracks that are running parallel and looking at the finances. The importance of this issue before you this morning is to look at the total cost. Is that consistent with what you've been looking for? The City Council, the side of this equation that is not presented before you directly and is the softer side of the whole thing is what benefit will Goodyear receive from this facility. The $6.9 million in total cost that includes the two-team facility and the operating cost simply reflect the outgo of funds. I have not seen a model that reflects what will come in as a result of this, and then there is the correlation to the community and that is where the City Council's role does come in that. We'll be talking a lot broader on other projects, leaving assumptions that we've made all along. As you'll recall in this dialogue back about 6 months ago, we had a dialogue that talked about the revolving fund, and in that we reflected about $3 million a year just for debt service at that point in time. Does that answer your question?
Not really, but it helps a little.
I think the point is, and that's really why one of the reasons we're here today is by approving this, how does that impact our other plans and priorities for capital improvements over the next 5 to 10 years?
That's exactly right.
Are there things which you can say are going to be sacrificed? Or do you suspicion that?
The model that we built the capital improvements plan on reflected a capital or debt service outlay for this project of $3 million a year. Okay.
Did it contemplate O&M?
The O&M
Sorry,
was
integrate
not
that
built
into-
into that. We put that down at the bottom as increased O&M due to facility
Okay,
maintenance
okay.
and so forth.
All right.
So that's really that debt service line, but that model did contemplate $3 million a year coming out of what we labeled the revolving fund. So the impact is the remaining $1.7 million and the benefits that would come with that.
I would, I'm sure, like to see a stadium as much as anyone in this room would like to see a stadium, maybe more so. But I think we have to.
You'll have to talk louder, Fred, because you're not on speaker.
These
I was
are recording us, but they're not
okay.
amplified.
I stated that I would like to see a stadium probably at least as much as anyone in this room. And we're being pushed here to make a decision because we don't want to lose a ball club. We want to commit ourselves. Yet on the other hand, we have a community that we're responsible for. And somehow, some way, we need to have more information than we have now in order to make this very important decision. And Larry, you got to get this to us. You got to guide us here.
As a part of next week's presentation that I'll go over right now is what funds are available that the City Council can look at within this budget year. And I just want to go over that a little bit with you now to maybe help you with a little background. Since the adopted budget, first of all, as you'll recall, when we adopted the budget, we were not sure of our state shared revenues at that point in time. Those estimates, we told you when asked, we said we were very conservative on those estimates and would bring them back to you in September. And that number increases about $4.2 million. The City Council, at the time that we discussed that, was looking at personnel costs as one option for that, but also I think made it clear that it's possible project costs could be paid out of that if that's what you considered necessary. So that's one source of funding. The current budget also includes $2.4 million of revolving fund, which is unallocated money controlled solely by the City Council. That could be applied into this project as an upfront cost to reduce future financing costs if the City Council desired. In addition, in the general fund, as a result of the preparation for the audit for this coming year, we're expecting general fund cash balances in excess of what we projected at the time we put the budget together of approximately $3 million. 3.3 million is actually the number I'll be presenting to you next week. And so part of the equation is those funds are available for City Council discretion. There are also various other costs for the City Council that we will be reviewing next week for consideration. Some of those costs include capital improvement projects that were not funded on the original capital improvement plan that warrant consideration, such as the widening of MC 85 going out a couple years and projects of that nature. Also, the Bullard interchange money got left out. That's about $1.2 million that'll be included. So we'll be going through all of those to provide that total direction at that point in time. I recognize it doesn't directly answer what projects would we or would we not be doing. What I'm trying to do is to give you a background of impacts as we go through and make decisions and try to give you an overview on that.
Well, it does help a little, Larry. You've suddenly come up with, if I had it correct, about $7 million that we didn't anticipate having, or we weren't sure we would have. But you've also come up with some other costs that we weren't sure, we didn't account for in our budget. So once again, we have to have a list of our expenses and our potential revenue, and then make a decision on what, if anything, we have to bump in order to approve this. That's the way I look at this, and we really need that information from you.
Okay, let's start with Councilmember Antonio.
I just want to make sure I understand the paradigm that we're operating in here.
Excuse me, Rob.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me back there? Everybody. I usually don't have trouble having people hear me, so. And sorry if you guys feel like I'm yelling at you. I want to make sure folks in the back of the room hear me. STA, at least at this present time, I understand that they prefer a two-team site over a one-team site. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Antoniak, that's correct. Their practice and their urgence is for a two-team facility.
Okay, and then, but if we move forward with this idea of one team, if that's what we're discussing today, because obviously we have both options, we're looking at both sets of numbers here. I would anticipate we would put together an MOU. Give me an idea of the next steps that you take. We give you kind of authority to progress on this. I would think an MOU would have to be drafted and then seen by both or all three parties or four parties, depending on what all's entailed. So it would have to come back to us, as well as you'd have to go to STA to see if there's even any appetite for a one-team facility.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Antoniak, That's correct. We have been working behind the scenes on a couple of memorandums of understanding. One with Rose Properties Group because of the land involved and the project area involved. The other is with the teams. We have drafts out there with baseball teams right now. One in particular that Mr. Judson would like to reference here in a few minutes. There have been a lot of drafts back and forth, and we're very close to final on that memorandum of understanding. But certainly, any MOU would come back before council, whether it be with the developer, landowner, or whether it be with the teams. That's correct.
Because I think that's going to answer probably a lot of questions about how things would function, how relationships would be codified, and everything else. For me, at least, a lot of the operational things. But budget-wise, if we look at two-team, we're 1.7 over what we anticipated debt service. If we look at one team, we're 700,000 or so, a little less than 700,000 over what we anticipated would be debt service. If I just speak in general terms, and then on O&M, did we anticipate a number of what O&M would be? Because kind of look at this as overall impact. We've got 1.7 on debt, but what's the O&M implications, or have there been changes there? Did I miss that?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Antoniak, is Mr. Lane talked about somewhat previously, is in fact the O&M costs were always anticipated. They have not changed.
Okay.
With the exception of the capital replacement allocation, that's the only amount that has changed from previous figures. But those have been factored into our considerations for annual costs.
And then, at what fiscal year would we be seeing this impact? What would it be? Fiscal year 07, 08?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Antoniak, we would be looking at 2009, before the costs really start hitting us. We're anticipating a completion of the stadium itself in February 2009.
So fiscal year 09-10, we would start to see the impact. So arguably, we would have, if we went with the one team, well, either way, let's just say above and beyond the projections, we would have that anticipated cost from fiscal year 09 to fiscal year 17, in terms of the STA interest-only payment, which is to me the largest share. I mean, it greatly reduces after the STA starts picking up in 17-18. Correct? Am I understanding this correctly?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Antoniak, I believe, and see the Finance Director question to Larry, is on an interest-only, when we do revenue bonds, those interest payments would be due when? Keep in mind that we're going to be funding construction, and construction will be completed in 2009.
I believe the project costs included capitalized interest for 18 months, that it would be 18 months out before the payment. Scott, do you recall in the conversations?
18 months starting in 2007.
From when we issued the bonds, the first 18 months of bond payments would be financed as part of the principal, so that your payment would go out 18 months.
Later.
Yes.
Okay.
From the beginning of construction, not from the beginning of that.
I assume you're issuing the bonds at construction start.
Yes.
Right, not stadium start date. Yeah.
Yes.
Operation date.
Right. So if we opened February of 09, I would imagine it's a 12 to 18, 24-month project.
Yeah, count on 2007.
So count on 2007 issuing the bonds, and then 18 months later making first payment?
Yeah. That would be correct, yes.
So we've got 9 fiscal years of carrying the interest until the large portion of the interest until the STA picks up, granted if they have the appetite to go with a one-team facility, if that's what we discussed. Okay.
Yes.
I just read that. Okay. You know, I mean, I think. Well, I mean, we'll see what the gentleman representing baseball, what Eric has to say this this morning, not this evening, this morning. But, withstanding that, I mean, to me, it's, $700,000 over, given all of the increases we've seen, isn't totally outlandish to me. We've seen all the changes and fluctuations in the market, and I would anticipate that we would see the same in this. But I think we need to find out whether or not the appetite is there for the one-team facility if that's what we decide to pursue, based on conversations we may have, withstanding the conversations we may have here over the next 45 minutes or an hour. There's not a lot of shock and awe here with the one-team facility. And the two-team facility is digestible. It just, without a doubt, Councilmember Scott's concerns and the conversation that we'll have next Monday will at least ease, or at least help me understand better what the impacts are to the overall fiscal impacts to the city over the next 9 to 10 fiscal years as it relates to CIP projects and what the impacts are there. But I don't see why we can't run the two concurrently, at least to get moving on things.
Councilmember Souza?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Brian, you always said that the AZSTA estimate of car rental surcharge and hotel tax was, the tax that we would derive from that was much lower than what they estimated would be coming from that source. Do you feel the same way, that they evaluated that income?
Can't hear you. They're going to have to speak up.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Souza, I'll repeat the question. The question is the STA projection of funds or revenues, the revenue stream coming in, is it lower than what we think it is? And just real quickly, the revenue streams for the STA are derived from two sources. They receive a 1% sales tax on all hotels. Anytime someone stays in a hotel, 1% of that they're taxed on that goes to the STA. The other is 3.5% on car rentals. So that's their revenue streams that really pay for the bricks and mortar of stadiums, whether it be new stadiums or renovations. So the question is, and we asked the same question of our financial advisor, is they are looking at, they are conservative in what they do, but I believe that they need to be conservative because of the amount of bonds, of costs that they're on the hook for. But we believe that they are, that they can be higher over time. But again, we have to understand that we work with their numbers. So if their numbers, if they're conservative, we have to honor that. We have to recognize that. What might happen, though, is that the payments or the principal would be retired that much more quickly if, in fact, they wanted to do that. So we're working under the principle that their numbers are conservative, but we're staying with those figures.
Okay, thank you. Are we at liberty to tell the council at the present time what team we're dealing with at the present time?
Mayor, Councilmember Souza, that perhaps is our best news today, I would think, and I have asked Mr. Judson to give us an update when it's appropriate to talk about where we're at with baseball.
Okay. I asked that question because I just wonder if we're spinning our wheels, because I'm looking at a communication here that came through the city manager regarding the Cleveland team. Are you at liberty to tell me that the Cleveland team is the one we're looking at?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Souza, in fact, we will be talking about the Cleveland Indians today, and Mr. Judson has been our point person with the team most frequently. The mayor certainly has had contact as well. Mr. Judson has had hours of contact with the team over the last few weeks, and certainly the last few days. So it's best to ask him to answer that question.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go under the the impression that they are one of the teams in consideration. And the reason I say that I'm fearful about us spinning our wheels relative to this team is what is contained in this communication. And I'll read from the communication. The city of Goodyear is making a strong push to attract the Cleveland Indians to a proposed spring training facility, a move that it would give the Valley 13 spring training teams and return Cleveland to Arizona after it left Tucson in 1992. Cleveland also is negotiating with Osceola County in Florida, which has until October 2nd to apply for a $7 million in funding, FI's state government on which it is expected to be a $20 million project. The state of Arizona has earmarked funds to help cities build spring training facilities, as was done as a prize for the Texas League. Cleveland was trained in Winter Haven and will remain there until 2007. Appears to be leaning toward remaining in Florida, the approximate fan base that it has there. If the sides agree, a new facility would be built at Lake Buena Vista, where Atlanta already has a complex, a team stadium, but a separate training facility would be built for Cleveland. That is a concern for me.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
Anybody wish to answer that?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Souza, I would ask Mr. Judson if timing's right. We can ask him right now, Mayor, if that's
Do you want to?
that's a direction.
Can we wait until he gets up?
Yeah.
I'll address that in detail when I get
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Yes, most of the questions have been answered that I had on my notes. As a matter of fact, I think most of them, all of them have. My concern is, I guess it amounts to this. If you don't try, you've lost. If you try and lost, at least you've given it your best shot. And I don't think at this point we're only asking the city staff to continue pursuing this. So any vote today would be exactly that. Unless there would be funding that would have to go out, extensive funding, with our decision to take number one, to direct staff to continue the spring training facility. Is that true? I mean, and what are we talking about if we say yes to this today, for you to continue pursuing this?
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor Cavalier, if council provides direction to staff to continue going forward, what that means is that we would work toward finalizing the memos of understanding. We would, which would come back before council. We would also be working with the STA. If in fact we go forward with a one-team application, we would that would be some of the next steps as well. So there's not certainty as it relates to being successful in these fronts. The risk is that while we may receive direction from council, we may or may not be successful in finalizing some of the negotiations and coming to signature. But at the same time, staff felt it was very important to bring these figures before council now, and understanding the timing of where the teams are in Florida in the Grapefruit League, where they're at in their decision processes, we felt it would, if in fact the council did recommend pursuing baseball, I think that sends a strong message to particularly one team that we're working with, if not others.
Okay, thank you.
I have several questions. Let me start with them. We've been working on these two MOUs for a couple months now, and I think the council needs to know what the disconnects are. Okay, you're down to relatively few points in which there's a disagreement between the city and the developer on the one, and the city and the developer with the team on the other. So, why don't you tell us what those disconnects are?
Mr. Mayor, the disconnects or some of those areas that we were trying to finalize in negotiations with the developer have come much closer to being finalized. And a big part of that was the developer stepping up, the landowner, with the landowner's consent, to agree to put more dollars on the table to help the project work. So biggest concern is just the costs involved, and I believe that the developer has come forward in a very strong way to finalize that. I'd ask if there are also specific questions on the MOU. Mr. Ruby, who crafted the MOU for us, might have some additional comments to make as it relates to that. With the, Scott, is there anything you want to add to that?
Bring my own chair.
Okay.
Larry, you can stand. Brought my chair. Mayor, members of the council, good to be here this morning. As far as the MOU goes with the team, I do think we have made substantial progress. I think Eric can speak to that directly because he has been in touch with the teams. Relative to business points on that MOU, it's a fairly standard MOU as it exists between other spring training teams. There have been some facility requirements, I think, that have been the biggest point of discussion, and I won't even say negotiation. They have an idea of what they'd like to see for their complex, and they've presented that in a significant amount of detail, and frankly it allowed, I'm sure, JMI Sports to go out and get us a pretty good estimate then of what those facilities would cost, and that's really the genesis for the meeting this morning, is because given just general construction cost increases and some of the facility demands, it did produce a higher number. So from a team perspective, I feel fairly confident. I won't quarrel with the article. I think it is what it is, and we've all understood that from the very beginning, is that some of these teams have a Florida presence, and all things being equal, they'd probably like to stay there, but all things are not equal, and consequently we do have an opportunity perhaps, and we'll know more in a week or so, to pull one of these teams to Arizona at least. As far as the MOU with the developer, as Brian said, we've had a couple of conversations on that, Mayor. We have been able to, in effect, bifurcate the MOU. Originally, we were speaking both to development aspects of that property and the baseball aspects of that property, and we have sorted out into and have agreed that the development aspects of that property will be handled in a traditional development agreement that the city has probably entered into and had discussions with a number of developers. The baseball aspects we have been able to separate out. We've determined that probably it's best suited for both the project and the city to go with a project coordinator concept that'll have the developer assisting the city and the city assisting the developer in the effort to produce baseball facilities. So we've come a long way there. We had a discussion with developer, JMI Sports, their lawyer, et cetera, and I think everybody was satisfied at the end of that we were on the same page. So that's probably enough on that.
I didn't hear a single disconnect in a specific sense.
I don't think there's a single significant disconnect. I think we do have to finish up and kind of polish what the little issues and the verbiage. So, and that's all lawyer stuff, and I feel fairly confident on that. Now, again, that's not to say that there might be some issue that pops up that we're unaware of right now, but I have a high degree of confidence that we're going to be able to overcome even that type of scenario.
The total cost. Do they reflect the Indians' desire for the clubhouse or the current negotiation?
I think Eric Judson would be the best to speak to that, Mayor, if we could bring him up on that point, because...
Does it? Which one?
They do, in fact, yeah.
So it's the 41,000?
No, they've agreed to 38,000.
They have? Okay, thank you. They have agreed?
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. Some water. Okay. The land square foot estimate of, I think it's $5.67 or something a square foot. That's based on what? Is that an appraisal or?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the estimate is slightly over $5 a square foot is what we plugged in there for a number, and that is an estimated amount. It's not an appraised amount. That being said, that there's about 125 acres that would be associated with the two teams. versus 75 acres for a one team. The city's role in that is about, we would, with the general obligation bond, be purchasing 125 acres for about $10 million, which is actually around, it's less than $2 a square foot. And then for a one team, about the same thing. Because we're dropping in acreage size, it would be an actual cost to the city for substantially less as well. But we are estimating that for purposes of reimbursements.
Yeah, I understand that. So the 560, it is not just over, it's quite a bit over $5. It's 567 or something like that. And that is based on, how did you arrive at that number?
Mr. Mayor, that number was arrived at based on the reimbursement amounts that we were looking at from the STA, looking at what the land value would be once the improvements were made, including streets, infrastructure, those types of things.
On funding sources number 2, city facility improvements, $3.5 million. Could you explain that? What is the composition of that? Right back.
Can I follow up on your question
last
about the land?
question?
Yeah, so answer that again. I'm not sure I completely understood how the land value per square foot was arrived at. The five and change. You backed into it from looking at other improvements? Sorry, just restate for me because I didn't pick up on it.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Antoniak, it was derived really from looking at what the reimbursable amounts are from the STA on a project. They will reimburse up to 2/3. And then it was also looking at what the value would be once the infrastructure was put in place. Now, it's important to understand, though, on the land, regardless of what it's estimated at, the fact is that the STA will look at a 2/3 reimbursement. If land's a component of that, we put it in there as a component of the total amount that would be reimbursed, plus the cost of the stadium and the training facilities. If the land value at the end of the day were to be reduced, we're confident that we still have our 1/3 match, if you will, for the complex.
And the question on the city facility improvements, what does that comprised of?
Mr. Mayor, the city facility improvements for a 2-team at $3.5 million, that is really the difference of what the cost of the stadium is, minus what the STA will reimburse us for, minus what the developer landowner is putting into the project, minus what the team considerations would be. So whatever is not being funded by those items, that's the remaining amount that we would have to then add to our cost.
And do you know what that is? Yeah, the 3.5 will therefore pay for what in a specific sense?
Mr. Mayor, that is tied strictly to the facilities for the stadium, as well as the training facilities for the teams, 6.5 practice fields. So it's very project specific, strictly tied to the spring training complex. It would not be tied to infrastructure. It would not be tied to ancillary development. It would be tied strictly to that project.
Nor consultants, strictly hardware. Okay, not hardware, but
Bricks and mortar.
bricks and mortar. All right. The team contribution is $300,000 or $150,000 a year, and that's a relatively new thing. Do we have assurance of that? Did they agree to that?
Mr. Mayor, the $300,000 that we're estimating for a 2-team will come from one of two sources. Either the teams would agree to put in $150,000 each. That has not been finalized. However, if they do not agree to put that amount in, then the scope of the project, the bricks and mortar cost, would actually be reduced by that much. So in other words, we would not be, if we did not get an annual debt service contribution from the teams, the project would be reduced from the $77.5 million down to $74.5. But we also have to factor in the additional revenues that would come in from the project. We're going to be getting revenues off the project. We're estimating a net cost to the city of about $2 million for the O&M portion. If the revenues are stronger, that would also help us to fund any of the debt service associated with that. But principally, it's really two things. Team puts it in, or we reduce the project scope.
And the teams haven't, the team's not agreed with it.
It's being discussed right now with the team.
The last thing is, and it's hard to verbally state this, but the net present value sort of concerns me. And I did talk to Larry Landry, is the director of SDA. I talked to him this weekend. And he emphasized that, yeah, they want a two-team facility, but they'll listen to us on a one-team. And he says the decision will be made by the board, not the staff. And he said there may be more than 48. But we're talking 10% maybe, something like that. But 48 is what, whether it's 48 or 52, we're saying it's 60 because of net present value. But in today's dollars, we're going to borrow 60. We're going to pay interest on 60.
That's right.
Not 48. So, and I don't know how to verbalize this, but there's something here that sounds fishy to me.
Mayor, members of council. Not sure why I get the fishy question.
You got an attorney to laugh.
Well, not only that, now you have an attorney talking about numbers and net present value. Mr. Lang should be helping you, but through the magic of net present value, I guess that's the answer is what it is, and that is you have an income stream of $48 million that really doesn't commence until 2019. Okay. In the interim, however, we are, and that's our funding of the interest on that obligation. That adds back into this whole net present value calculation. So we are able to take a $48 million income stream, which commences in 2017, 19, whatever it is, and continues for that number of 10 years, add to it our interest component in the early years, and we're able to sell $60 million worth of obligations. That's the way net present value numbers work. Larry, would you come up here since you're frowning at me? It also has a component. You can have your chair back. I told you I shouldn't be answering the fishy questions. It also has the component of how we do our funding with interest only, capitalized interest, and all that. Those elements, I think, add back into the 60. Larry, please.
Okay, the one element that was missed in what Scott mentioned on that, the STA will fund interest from the time we sell the bonds and the project starts up until the time that they start reimbursing. Okay? And that's where if the $48 million is principal, they will reimburse the interest on that $48 million at, and I believe that their rate is something like 5%. 4.5. Is it 4.5 or 5? They will reimburse that interest for that period of time.
So the revenue that they generate on the 48 is going to reimburse to us in 2019.
The money that they reimburse us starting in 2019 will reimburse us for interest that we have paid in the past years. It'll actually reimburse us more than $60 million. The present value calculation of that future stream of flows has been made at $60 million. But that includes a recovery of interest that we paid. So we are getting, at using the $48 million, we're getting $48 million plus interest over that period of time.
I get that. I understand.
But not
But
until
we're borrowing
2019.
60.
That is correct.
I'm just going to ask as a matter of practice after this meeting if you'd put that down on paper for us to digest. I think I'm grasping what you're saying, but think it's important to see that, the net, the net effect today and the net effect, 2017, 19, whatever fiscal year it is, and how we're made whole.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Antoniak, we have a number of those runs. Larry Given of Peacock Staley has been preparing those numbers runs, has also been in contact with Chuck Foley of the STA, and together they've arrived at the conclusions described by Larry Lang.
Okay.
So we feel fairly confident that, given the two financial guys having spoken on this very point, that it's an accurate number.
I guess, can anybody question us on our integrity by saying that we're going to borrow 60, but the STA is only going to give us 48? Is that, I know a little about net present value, but, I could never answer that one in a tough session. So I just want to make sure that when we speak to the public, that no one can question our integrity on this. That we're borrowing 60, we're only going to get 48, and we're applying net present value to that to make it look like 60. Is that okay?
I believe it is, but again, remember the numbers have gone up a bit from 60, so the story is we're borrowing 60 under the scenario of that's what's covered by the STA. Because the numbers have increased, that bond issue will actually be a bit larger in order to cover the increased cost. And that was the earlier discussion by Councilmember Scott, which was what are we sacrificing? Well, you're sacrificing this increased component, which is it's either an apple or an orange. It's an apple in that it's X number of dollars per year for the next 20 years, $1.7 million over what you'd originally have. Or if you were to bond that amount, it's about $20 million if you were to present value that income stream to today. So it's either, we're giving up a $20 million capital project in or around 2008 or 9, or we're giving up $1.7 million for an income stream for 20 years.
Thank you.
Is that right?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But I would direct the financial director to make certain that you cover the questions that Councilman Scott has. How is this going to affect our CIP projects, i.e. the city center, for example? Are we going to have to sacrifice that, or are we going to put it back another 2, 3, 4 years because we're going into this project? I think that's important. And other CIP projects that might be put in advance to accommodate what we're discussing here.
If I
ballpark.
could, having had an opportunity to visit with a couple of people who heard my comments, I wasn't prepared really to go too much into that.
Well,
but from some discussions, if I could, that might just help you a little bit.
Well, I think we can wait until Monday when you make your report.
Okay, with that.
Yeah.
That's
That'll give you enough time to peruse the question itself, so you can come up with an answer that I hope is favorable to it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Vice Mayor.
I have a couple of questions. Number one, I guess to Scott. What does this do to our bonding capacity for other projects? Does it affect or put a limit on our bonding capacity? Because right now we're in pretty good shape.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, if I can answer that in kind of co-answer with Larry, my perspective would be what in effect this does, it is kind of the answer is what I stated a little earlier. It in effect takes your ability to issue sales tax supported bonds, which right now you as a city issue through your Public Improvement Corporation, and reduces that ability because you sell bonds for this project. And it's either if you had a 2-team facility and you're taking the revenue stream of $1.7 million, you could sell $20 million worth of bonds. What you are determining here, with a direction to go forward on a 2-team facility, is we have decided that the $20 million in this case will go towards the baseball facility on a 2-team facility. If it's a 1-team, I think the number is 11.5 or 11.1. So as far as reducing your capacity, it doesn't reduce it, it uses it for this project. It uses it on a two-team facility in the amount of $20 million, and a one-team, it uses about 11.1 of it.
Okay, but after that, if we were to look forward to other projects, i.e. city center or whatever, what does that do to our bonding capacity if we wanted to sell bonds for, say, City Hall or any other?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, if I could, I'll turn to Larry on that, because you have a debt service schedule right now on your existing Public Improvement Corporation bonds, which is retiring debt, which is freeing up an income stream of sales tax to apply to new debt. And I'm sure Larry kind of knows what that number is. The other component that Larry mentioned earlier was, you don't know what this project is going to do for the city, and so I don't think the city has been able to model, whether sales taxes may go up, receipts anyway, by $1,000 or $1 million, and so that's kind of out of the modeling equation. But with respect to how quickly you're recapturing your ability to issue sales tax bonds, Larry, do you?
Well, our annual sales tax collections are $30 million, and our existing sales tax bonds are less than $1 million a year. However, that also is our primary source of operating funds, so it really flows together with the rest of how we put our budget together.
But there is a surplus.
There is a surplus in that capacity. That is correct.
And then the other thing, if we pursue this project, and this came about, and we built the stadium, in my mind, there's opportunity for more partnerships with development between the city and the development for further building of any infrastructure and any more retail structure that would bring even more income to the city. That has just got to be there. I can't understand. I wouldn't think that it was possible for that not to be there. Do you foresee that kind of thing, Brian?
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor Cavalier, absolutely. Some of the things that we've talked about with the stadium coming in, it would accelerate, we believe, the entire city center area, which, when that happens, then the revenues start coming in, whether it be property tax, construction sales tax, retail sales tax. So absolutely. And that has not been factored in to the equation at this point.
I understand.
We
can't, but I understand that we can't. But you see that as, from what you probably have with your contacts with development, you see that as a possibility in the future.
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, absolutely. And it might even be worth it for Mr. Ruggieri to talk about their development plans too, but if he wants to comment as far as what this does to accelerate their project, what would, sooner rather than later, and when that happens, the revenue stream absolutely starts. So, in answer to your question, yes, we see substantial revenues being derived.
Thank you, Member Scott.
Yeah, maybe I missed something somewhere along the line here, but when will we have a commitment from STA on this project, be it a one-team or two-team, and how is that going to affect obtaining a letter of intent if this moves forward?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Scott, it's kind of chicken and egg, and what that is that if it's deemed to go forward at this point, then we work toward finalizing. We would look to get the signature on the dotted line with the team, and that is required before we make application to the STA. All that could happen in the next several days, certainly. Decision from the STA may not be forthcoming until October or sometime after that, because they need their study period as well to look at the project. So all of it certainly in the next couple of months, but it's but at the same time we would not know until the STA makes final determination.
So we have no commitment then if STA says no, we're off the hook.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Scott, absolutely. If there are provisions in the MOU that are stated that if we do not get the funding from the STA, we are not committed to going forward.
And is the STA looking, as they were in the past, at any other cities? Or is it a matter of yes or no to us? Or is it yes or no to us depending upon what another city or cities may be looking at here?
Councilmember Scott, it's absolutely other cities are looking at trying to attract spring training. So the competition is still there.
Thank you.
Hey, I think we're going to need a break here, but, Councilmember Souza's question, and you said you had a response ready for it. When we leave here today, we're going to have to decide, do we want to proceed on the MOUs, proceed to schedule with SDA, proceed to give a good feeling to the single team that we're talking to. And I think, therefore, we can't wait till Monday on your answer. So is that all right with you?
Fine. If we can give it to it, it'll be fine.
What I'm hoping to do is maybe a little clarity to what I answered previously. As you recall, in about October of last year, we presented a 5-year financial model that outlined the growth in the city and its impacts on the budget. And as I'm going to be referring to the model because we are looking at a longer period of time rather than just simply 1 year in the budget to answer that question. And in the financial model, we have assumed, and in the discussions that we had on the revolving fund, we assumed the $2 million to operate would be absorbed as part of future operating costs. As we grow in our operating, that year, that emphasis would happen there. And that number has not changed in this process, as I understand it. In the process also, we included in that model a revolving fund that will build up to a total of $5 million a year. That was to cover several specific projects controlled by the City Council, which included the stadium facility, it included the widening of I-10, assuming no funding for that coming back and so forth. In that model and in the revolving fund model, we programmed the stadium in at $3 million a year. That's $3 million out of the $4.7 that is presented to you today. So that leaves us remaining the $1.7 million. So I indicated earlier, and we'll talk about next week a little bit, the state shared revenues added to the budget, in addition to what we expected, increased by approximately $4 million, 4.2. That is a total increase, more significant because we had already programmed in about a $3 million increase. That's a fairly significant increase in those state shared revenues.
Larry, now the state shared revenues would be constant?
Yes.
Year after year
they
after
would
year?
come back every year. That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And in 2010, with a new census, assuming Goodyear continues to grow at a rate faster than the state of Arizona, that number would grow in the future. But at this point, that number is a pretty comfortable number. If we were to take $1.7 million out of that, that would leave $2.3 million remaining in there that could be used for additional staffing needs, could be used for additional projects. The question becomes, what will this do to our existing capital improvements plan as adopted by the City Council? This will not reduce that because these extra funds are available that we do not need to reduce that. And that's why I wanted to make sure we got clarity on with you. The other part is if you were to leave $2.3 million as a remainder available in the budget, what would that equate to? Approximately 23 staff people if you wanted to go with staff. If you wanted to go with projects, it could be a one-time each year project of about $2.3 million, or you could finance a $23 million project and pay the debt service on it. So that's what would be remaining. And maybe that's a little clearer answer to the question earlier today.
Yes, I think it is. Okay. Any other questions? Of course, you can always ask again if people aren't leaving. Eric, before you come up, how about if we take a break? Can we break till 9:30? Is that right?
Mayor, I got to just public disclosure. I have to leave at 10:15. So, and that was I notified staff that I'd be here for 2 hours, and I'm pushing my schedule right now. So, I want to give due time to the process, and and everybody that's come out.
How about
this morning.
9:25? 9:25.
Just 5 minutes.
Okay, Mr. Mayor and council members, what we'd like to do at this point is I'd like to introduce John Ruggieri with Rose Properties. He has a few comments he'd like to make, and then he in turn will introduce our representative from JMI Sports. So, John?
Thank you, Brian. Mr. Mayor, members of council, thanks very much for giving us the opportunity to respond to your questions today. I'll be brief in consideration of the short time period that we have to be able to get to a positive vote today. I'd first like to say that we have made a tremendous amount of progress. And since the last time this body met and the promises that we made, I have been very, very impressed with the hard work that Eric Judson has put into the project. I now have a great appreciation as to the marketplace that is out there and how difficult it is to negotiate it. I'd also like to say that the Wood family is here present, Margaret Carl, Ken and Pugwood, and their spouses Pauline and Sharon. We are working very, very closely with them. I want to be very clear to let you know that the Wood family and Rose Properties are very supportive of this project. We think that it will create a tremendous amount of economic opportunity and economic development within the city. The numbers that you have gone through this morning all relate to costs. We have not really substantially discussed the other side of the ledger, the amount of revenues that it could potentially bring in. I'd like to just take a couple minutes, give you my ideas on that, tell you where we are, answer some of your questions about the two MOUs, and then hand it over to Eric Judson. We've made quite a bit of progress on the MOU with the team. I think that we're very close. Eric will talk about that very specifically. We also have been working with staff on the MOU for the development and also the MOU for the project coordinator. I've been working very, very closely with Brian and Corey. First off, I'd like to compliment both of them. It has been very good working with both of them. You should be very proud and thankful because it has been a very positive experience for us. We are very close on both of those MOUs. The details on there relate to, I think, timing issues, and I think that bond counsel Scott has accurately represented it. We're trying to separate the two agreements so that the language is clear between the two. I think we're in the process of doing that. I don't see any real issues related to coming to successful conclusion on both of those MOUs. We could do that probably within a couple days if necessary. On the revenue side, I think Eric can probably talk to you about a little bit about projected revenues off of the game day that could come back to the city. He has some spreadsheets on that. One of the things that this partnership does for us and for the city is that it potentially substantially accelerates the development of a significant portion of our property. In our estimate, it could very easily accelerate the development by 5 years. What is the value of that acceleration and how much revenue is generated off of it remains to be seen. But we are in the process right now. We have staff support to planning and zoning here this week on the Wood Corporate Campus. We hope to be before this body in October to get a positive vote and your support on it. If we are able to accomplish that under normalized circumstances, it will probably take several years for a corporate campus to begin to develop. We have to wait a little bit for the marketplace to catch up to us. Under this scenario, we treat Major League Baseball and the one or two teams as anchor tenants in a major retail development, a major mixed-use retail development. This is not unlike some of the other projects that you are analyzing. concurrently. It has a little different nature, but the economic impact of it could be almost as significant. We have not been able to do those numbers yet because we're busy putting together the deal at this point. And with that, what I'd like to do is just talk to you, hand it over to Eric. Eric with JMI Sports, the president of JMI Sports. I can't say enough about the amount of work that Eric has put into it. It is not only the people that he knows in Major League Baseball, but also how deals go together and how the industry works and what a tremendous commitment it takes on the part of a team to consider moving all the way across country, moving their organization across country. I think that we are very, very close to being there, and that is a substantial thing to say when you consider an organization with the kinds of organizations that we're talking about and the kinds of commitments that they are willing to make in relocating and also investing in our community. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Eric.
Thank you, John, members of the council. It's already been stated today a little bit, but real briefly, it's already been stated the amount of work that has been done, and John, thank you very much for that introduction. It was nearly 7 months ago that we sat before you and talked about this effort and how excited we were about the project that we had presented to you at that time. What's happened in the interim is really a great collaboration, first and foremost, between JMI Sports, the city, Brian, his team, and Rose Properties. We have cast a wide net, as you'll see in your notes, to capture as many teams who we felt were available. That number was 13 initially. We quickly recognized that number was going to be much smaller, and there were only a few candidates who would even contemplate a move to the desert, to Arizona and the Cactus League. Our challenge has been very difficult. It certainly hasn't been for a lack of effort, to be sure, but these are difficult decisions, as John indicated, for the teams, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But I will tell you, once again, we have made great progress. The decision to move, and I'm going to give you a little more detail on this, and this is specifically related to discussions I've had with teams. The decision to move from Florida in the Grapefruit League to the Cactus League has significant financial impacts that we don't see. The cost of picking up and moving are significant. The logistical differences of being in Arizona versus being in Florida are significant, and we are talking to East Coast teams. There's no question about that's a logistical challenge for them. And they also have, and I think real importantly, a fan base issue to deal with. Many of the teams on the East Coast certainly feel as though that their fan base has an affiliation with Florida. So we have to shift, of course, a great deal of thinking and understand that the responsibility that they have to move is a significant one, and the organizations do not take that lightly. The market, has been indicated, is very difficult. I think if you look back in time not long ago where you were able to attract teams from Florida, the Rangers, the Royals. You brought the White Sox back to Tucson. You brought the Padres organization from down in Yuma. It was a different marketplace. My mentor, Larry Lucchino, used to say when we were building the ballpark in San Diego, the curtain is closing. We're trying to get underneath that curtain before it, in fact, closes all the way. And I think that's very similar, to the process we're facing here. There are not a number of teams out there that are waiting anxiously to make that decision. And I think another reason for that is that the state of Florida, due to the great efforts of the state of Arizona, have woken up to two things. First of all, the economic impact of spring training, and that's not something we've talked about much today, but it is significant. They've also woken up to the fact that Arizona provides a very compelling opportunity for teams. So, as many of you know, and it was referenced in the article that you read today, Councilmember Souza, that the state has in fact come to the table with funds to retain those teams. So the efforts of the state in Florida, the cities and counties in Florida are significant. And what they're essentially trying to do is create an opportunity environment for deals to be made for those teams to remain. And what we're trying to do is to, with competitive spirit, of course, and for the best interest of all involved, to entice them to come to Arizona. And it is a very difficult task, I think, once again, because of the previous successes. Very clearly, our efforts today are still focused on two teams. Okay, we're going to talk about one team specifically. We are going to talk about the Cleveland Indians because that is a team that we are much further along down the path with. But we have not by any means given up our efforts to bring two teams. And in fact, through all of our internal discussions, we've, I think, recognized that we need a bird in the hand. We need that first team before we'll ever even be able to contemplate a second team. Because the market just does not exist right now for us to go out and say, you two teams come together collectively to our market. So although we might be before the STA with a single team, we'll be before the STA saying we have a single team, and we are actively marketing to other teams from Florida as well. Okay, so don't lose sight of the fact that our commitment is still there. I'm going to speak to the market in Florida real quickly before I get to the Indian scenario. On October 2nd, as was referenced in the article, the cities and counties in Florida have to have, and the teams have to have before the state their proposals to secure the state funds. And essentially what it is over 15 years, over 30 years, they get $500,000 a year to go to the development of a project. Not a whole lot. Okay, but those teams, whether it be the Reds, the Pirates, the Orioles, okay, they're all actively pursuing that state funding. Okay, they don't have their deals done yet. So again, if we're successful in bringing the Indians, and the market continues to evolve, and in fact continues to stress in Florida, I think our chances could very well improve in the coming weeks. Okay, so the activity is still, and I would say it's even coming to a peak again. There have been some ebbs and flows here, but with that October 2nd date pending, the market is changing dramatically. Okay, now I'm going to speak specifically with respect to the Cleveland Indians. They are the one team that really is on the verge of making a decision. And they are on the verge of making a decision prior to that October 2nd deadline. Okay, they do have, in fact, a deal that they're working on at Lake Buena Vista with Disney to share with the Atlanta Braves. They are very compelled, and I will again reference the great work of the mayor, Brian, and his team. We brought them out here. Corey made a long presentation about the evolving environment here in the West Valley and how tremendous the growth was here. They were very compelled by that. They're very compelled by the plan that John and I have put before them for an integrated mixed-use development, and they, in fact, may be investors in such a project. So I think what's happened here is that Goodyear has sounded the alarm. And if it was a city who maybe was not nearly as far along, if it wasn't as compelling a project, the deal would have been done in Florida a long time ago for them. But we've compelled them in a way that I think is captivating their entire organization, and they are contemplating this very difficult move. So the Indians are, in fact, the team that we're talking to. The teams, though, require, just as the city needs financial certainty, the teams require programmatic certainty. They need to understand what they're going to get, and they need to understand that the project is going to be completed. As Brian referenced, they are very well aware of the fact that there is some risk at the STA, that we collectively have to lobby the STA to, in fact, get their support. But they recognize that risk. They just want to make sure if the STA provides that funding, that the city is gung-ho behind it and they understand the finances. This really curveball, if I will, came, and the reason we're here today, when we finally went back to try to close that certainty gap from the city's financing and the programmatic request from the Indians. We embarked upon a 30-day exercise with three very credible general contractors, Turner, Barton Mallow, and Mortensen. And they all came back and provided terrific information. And what we asked them to do is give us a cost estimate in today's dollars, okay, and then also anticipating a 2007 start and a 2009 completion. Very clearly, the estimate that we looked at before when we presented to you initially looked at the surprise model and the estimate was done at the end of last year, beginning of 2006. The escalation alone to completion in 2009 is $7.5 million. Very significant. We're not sure. We don't have a project design, but I think it was Brian's good judgment. We have to put that before you and recognize that the costs, in fact, have increased. There are fees associated with the increase, but also in the previous estimate, there was not a scoreboard. Okay, for good reason, because you don't know exactly what the design looks like, what the cost is going to be. But we put in $1.5 million for that scoreboard because we wanted, again, to be before you, giving you the total cost and recognizing what is in fact out there. So how do we close that gap, that $12.5 million? The Indians, the Wood family, and Rose Properties in the city have been working on that, and that's why we're here before you today. But the Indians need to, in fact, know that with that increased cost, the city is in fact still committed to this project, and that's why I think they're anxiously awaiting my call after this meeting, and I talked to them earlier this morning. But the increased cost, if you think about that $12.5 million, is not a reflection of our negotiations with them. They came to us with a significant program request, 45,000 square feet of clubhouse. I think that's the best thing that you can really point to in terms of the size of the project. They have now reduced that to the 38,000 square feet that we originally proposed to them. Not originally, the 38,000 square feet that we had presented in the budget. Okay, so they in fact have made concessions on their facility, and it's a big deal for them because they see this as state-of-the-art, the best facility in baseball, and they want to make sure they're in fact getting that. They don't want to be in a situation where the city comes back to them and says, sorry, we can't have that extra half-practice field, we can't have that agility field because we can't afford it. They want to make sure that they understand what they're getting when they sign on the dotted line. Again, that very difficult decision. So our discussions have been productive. They are a great economic partner, we believe, in this process, ultimately not only in just the ballpark, but also in the ancillary development. We will be talking to them about being potential investors in this community. There are just a few outstanding items in our discussions with them, cost certainty, programmatic certainty, of course. But I promise you, I took this language before them, and the notes that you're seeing there in the team update have been reviewed by them. They were comfortable with me saying that the possibility of having a signed agreement with them is imminent if we can overcome some of these challenges. I can't tell you today that it is a done deal by any means. We've got a lot of hard work to do, but I will tell you that they are very, very seriously interested, and for the first time in the 6 months that I've been involved, 7 months, 8 months, 9 months in this process and on this project, we finally have a team who, if we act aggressively and proactively, that we can control our own destiny. And you'll see again in my language that we have a chance to control our own destiny for one team. And we hope again that bringing them on as a partner, then we have someone who will be standing side by side with us, also working to attract a second team. So again, very positive developments there. It's not the end of the road by any means, but I think for the first time we're at a place in the road where we see the finish line.
Councilmember Sousa?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Eric, now that we've made this public, is there a fear that if we don't come to some understanding relative to the Indians, that they will go to another city in Arizona,
No.
use that as a springboard?
Right.
Are they dealing specifically with Goodyear at the present time?
They are dealing specifically, and I want to make it very clear that they are not saying, if you don't, we're going someplace else. There's been no threatening discussion at all, but they are down the road with us. They are down the road with an opportunity in Florida, and they will choose between that opportunity. And I told John today, and again, not to put on pressure, they did not tell me to say this, but within hours, days, not weeks, because they have that very important October 2nd deadline before them, and they need to get their deal done with Disney, with Osceola County, with Lake Buena Vista, in an amount of time that gives them the opportunity to seal their deal and then be marching, to the state capitol together.
Well, I have
only Goodyear.
no doubt that it'll happen on October 2nd, because that's my birthday.
Oh, good. Okay.
Going to be 70?
Yeah. Again. The figures themselves that we contribute, the developers, Wood family, and the city of Goodyear, are glaring when you see what the club is contributing, $3 million. And now, when you mentioned, what is transpiring, I've never even entered my mind the transition costs. So I'm certainly that was taken into consideration when they made this, and that kind of eases me into getting away from that concern.
Right. And another thing, if I could just add to that's right. But also, we have the reality of the market. Okay, and we have Peoria and Surprise as recent successes. So the deal that we presented before to them is consistent with those deals. So the fact that they have other opportunities, if they were only looking, to the Goodyear, and this was their only opportunity, I'm sure that we could be more aggressive. But we have to be, at least cognizant of the fact that this is a deal that's consistent with other deals that have taken place here.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Eric, when you came to us the first time, you described what this stadium might look like and might be. Is it still that state-of-the-art design that you originally felt that you could build here when you presented that to us at that time?
Right. I would say yes and more. And because we've had the benefit of 8 months to, and John laughs every time in my office, I still have a drawing up on the board that we drew 6 months ago, and I tell him, I keep that up there, this vision up there, so through all these hard negotiations we're having and the tough financial decisions that we're making, we still remember the prize. John and I have, I think, evolved the plan, even further to recognize that really this is about a ballpark facility, and a spring training facility. But that ballpark, as John indicated, is going to be an anchor for significant mixed-use development. We were walking around Kierland Commons again last week, kind of dreaming about what a ballpark could do for spring training, but real importantly for the rest of the year as a civic asset. So those visions that we have remain intact.
Because that being what you say it will be, I think will impact what our city center and everything else that we build around that will be.
Right.
And I think it will, raise the bar on everything, retail and everything. At least that's the way I see it. Is that?
And we see it the same way. This is not a typical spring training facility out in a field. I would encourage all of us to think about this, and I always hate to bring Kierland Commons up, but it seems to be in our language right now. It's our experience. But as I go around the country, I see other Kierlands, and I look at them and I think, how is it if we had Major League Baseball, 1 or 2 Major League Baseball clubs as an anchor for a 2 or 3 month period in the midst of a mixed-use development? And then how do we program that during the balance of the year to bring in sports fantasy camps, Little League, international play? I mean, this is a facility that doesn't go dark. The way we're designing it, the way we hope to design it, is that it doesn't go dark 9 months a year. It's a living, breathing community asset that will be programmed, hopefully, 12 months a year.
And I will add, too, that the people that we've been talking to in the industry first, designers, general contractors. I mean, you talk to Turner, Barton, Malin Mortensen, they've built these before. They see our plan and their eyes are, they light up. They believe that this is a new paradigm in facility development. And then, of course, the teams. And I think I made that point earlier, that the Indians are compelled by the city of Goodyear and the plan we have before them.
Yes, Councilmember Scott.
I'm trying to put myself in a position of the Cleveland Indians. They're in Florida. Obviously, the facility there is not quite what they want, I would imagine.
Right.
They have to make some changes.
Right.
In order to make those changes, they have 2 possible avenues there. One is the small amount of money offered by the state, $500,000 a year for 10 or 15 years. And the other is possible money from Disney World. Is that correct?
Right, correct.
Is that... The $500,000 doesn't threaten me. That's not enough money for it.
Right.
But Disney World, what are they offering?
Right. Well, first of all, the head start that Disney has is that they already have a ballpark. They have a 10,000-seat facility that the Atlanta Braves hold their spring training games at. Okay, and we visited. John's been there. I've been there. I've walked through. It's a beautiful facility. So they don't need to pay for infrastructure. They don't need to pay for a $20 million ballpark. All they need to pay for is a 40,000 square foot practice clubhouse, okay, and the 6.5 fields and so forth. So they only need that project to paint the whole picture. Okay, the state money again is probably if you do the net present value of those dollars, it's only in the $7 to $10 million range. The county is being asked to step up for some dollars, and Disney is being asked to step up. There still is a gap there. It's a gap that the Indians believe can be closed very quickly if Disney so chooses. But it's not easy for them to make that type of decision. So again, that's why I think that we have an opportunity here presenting a brand new ballpark mixed-use project, string training facility that they again want to see as the state of the art, and one, I think another important point, that they want to spend 12 months a year here. They're going to have an operation here more than any other team that I've ever heard, where they've got people from all of their levels playing in this facility and training facility. They want classrooms. They want to be a part of this community. So that's where the difference lies.
And you don't think that they're using, the Cleveland Indians might be using us as leverage to put them in a better position with Disney?
Very good question. Very good question. And one that I asked very delicately last week again.
More so than I did?
Yeah, well, yeah, yours was not as delicate as the way I asked it. But I told the person that I'm dealing with there, who is, I think very instrumental in their club's decision, that the city, of course, wants to make sure. They have not had, shall I say, a terrific set of experiences here in this regard, and they want to make sure that we are not being used to play against another city. He, as you might imagine, he responded aggressively and said the deal points that we have in Goodyear are completely different than what we're facing in Florida. There's nothing I could put before them and say, we're getting this in Goodyear, could you give us this there? They are totally separate. I mean, they're on different continents at this point. And he said, we have never made any threats. We've never tried to play one deal against the other. We have a difficult decision, and we're trying to, weigh that decision. But they've never tried to, in my discussions with them, leverage the other deal. There's a reality we all face that they've got to make a decision, but it has not been initiated by them.
But, on the other hand, even though there's been no overt competition expressed, from what you just said, if Disney, there's no way of being sure about it. Disney offered them the clubhouse.
Right.
If they stayed, I think they'd probably stay from everything you said.
A new clubhouse, if they close the gap on financing, potentially. But I think the good news here is that if they go to Disney, which is not good news if they go to Disney, but if we move forward and they decide to go to Disney, there's no commitment by the city.
Sure.
Okay, we've put our plan before them. We've established what those costs are associated with that plan.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Antoniak.
I think we can what if the thing to death back and forth, and I'd hate to be asking the question 90 days from now, what if we had put our foot in the game and played? And so I think in the coming days and weeks, as the MOUs are given to us to review, and we look those over as well, you'll put a lot of, I'm not asking probably a lot of questions that I would if I had the MOU in front of me today, but I think the MOUs will put to rest a lot of questions that may exist, rightly or wrongly, in my head as I look at this. But I'd hate to be here 3 weeks, October 3rd, saying, we didn't put our foot in the game, and we didn't give ourselves a shot at the end result here. So we've been played once before, and we might get played once again. And I'm not saying that as any disrespect to anybody. If anybody that's doing due diligence is going to look as option A, option B, option C, and everything else, we need to give reason for any party to pause and say maybe Goodyear's the right place to be. So I'm willing to have that conversation. Better yet, I'm glad to hear that 2 teams isn't completely off the table, because I do think that the more successful stadiums have 2 teams. The more successful spring training facilities in the Valley and in Arizona have 2 teams. But jet fuel costs alone probably are a consideration for any East Coast team. So I think there'll be a lot of questions answered in the coming weeks. But let's move forward with it and see what the results are. I mean, until the MOUs are signed, no deal is done. So.
Okay. Councilmember Souza?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the efforts that you and the Wood family and certainly your folks have done in this venture. I hope that we're successful. I feel that this is a giant step forward, as John pointed out, that different concept than anybody has ever seen in a spring training facility. And I think it's wise to consider the type of program that you're talking about, because I was concerned about the use of this facility year-round, and you answered that point very clearly. I just hope that being a Pirate fan, that you can attract Pittsburgh here as a second team.
We'll try to get them for your 70th.
That's retrograde.
Yeah, first for Pittsburgh and Cleveland.
If there are other questions, fine. Otherwise, would you entertain a motion?
Yep.
Yeah, I had a couple questions.
Oh, go ahead. We'll let you.
No, well, let's roll. I can get my. Let me ask him real quick. First off, Rob, definitely we're going for 2 teams. This is step 1. We want a second team, and I think a second team will be much more likely to acquire.
Oh, no doubt.
Once we get to one.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Do we pay impact fees as a city? We're going to own this. Do we pay impact fees?
Good question.
This may not be the time to raise it.
Enough said, Mayor.
You have that option in November.
Okay, but of course, we'll do what's ever fair for everybody.
None of us would want
I really have a high level of respect for the Wood family. I know them. I have tremendous respect for Jack Rose and his entire group. But I really just wanted to state for the public that you have 2 major concurrent developments underway at the same time if we go with this. And I'm concerned about that. And I just hope that you give us the maximum attention in changing this into a concept, from a concept into a development of unparalleled quality. Not just the stadium, but the ancillary. And I think it's wise for us on council, particularly we're going to be talking funding next week, that to be very conservative in how we spend money over the next couple of months.
I agree with you.
And paying for people, we should probably limit it to filling vacant slots and upgrading positions, but I don't know if we want to, until the assessment is over in January, we might want to delay spending too much money on more people. And then I guess we need to get an STA schedule if we approve this ASAP, right? You're going to call the Indians, and I'll call Larry Landry when we leave here. If we get no matter what we do. Okay, it's an open meeting, and we're running out of time, but I do want, if anybody finds this objectionable, please speak up. Okay, thank you.
If anyone doesn't find it objectionable, speak up.
Okay, Councilmember Scott?
I'd like to make a motion that we, as a council, direct the staff to continue pursuing a spring training facility to include finalized related MOUs, funding, and reimbursements.
Second motion.
Motion from Councilmember Scott and a second from Vice Mayor Cavalier. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, 5-0, unanimous.
I do have one follow-up question. When would we anticipate seeing MOUs? What's staff's and everybody's goal?
MOUs would be forthcoming very quickly, finalized with both the developer and with the team.
By the end of the month.
I would, yes. I think it would be, we may have to call a special council meeting just to...
We do that once a week anyways.
It's going that way.
At least.
Let's make sure we have the mayor engaged in that schedule. I don't want it to be between the 22nd and the 28th. No offense, Mayor. I don't necessarily want to run your meeting for you while you're gone. So
Okay.
let's try and get it on. Let's try and get it. No, not a chicken. It's just I think you're imperative to the discussions, and that's why I asked. There's no doubt you're imperative to these discussions.
Thank you. Any inquiries of staff? Okay, we thank everybody. This is tough to reschedule, not reschedule, but schedule something that was not planned at all. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the council. Eric, thanks for coming over from San Diego.
Thanks for the meeting.